Welcome everyone. My name's Simon Ellis. I work here at the Centre for Dance Research, and together with Lily Hayward-Smith and Kate Marsh, we curate what's called C-DaRE Invites. These events are increasingly, or in fact more or less online, solely online now, and that's really partly to try and make them as widely accessible as possible. It also means that people that we can involve are more likely to be all over the place or from different parts of the world. Each year, more or less each year, is now themed. Last year, Series 1 in C-DaRE Invites was called The Body and AI. And this is the very first session in Series 2, which is called The Body and Science. So clearly at C-DaRE, there's something about the body. We have a feeling or a sensation that the body is somehow important or fundamental to the work we do here. So why the body and science? I'm going to just give a motley collection. I'll call it that, a motley collection of things that seem to be important when we're thinking about, let's just say, science. And I'm going to just place them into the Zoom ether as a way of framing a conversation which is, let's say, somehow a subset of this broader theme. So Sam Dress is a philosopher. He wrote a piece in Aeon called "Science is not the only form of knowledge, but it is the best." And he makes the distinction between scientism, think communism or fascism, the suffix ism meaning to take sides with a system or a doctrine or some kind of grand narrative, and the scientific method, between scientism and the scientific method, that we must be careful to disambiguate here, even though the three of us, Kate, Lily, and me, were intentionally ambiguous in the title of this series. And then a science historian, Jessica Riskin, wrote of the rise of the scientific method as a feat of branding. And a central part of this branding was the elimination of interpretation. She quotes Karl Popper himself, and this is from 1935. Popper wrote, "Out of uninterpreted sense experiences, science cannot be distilled. No matter how industriously we gather and sort them, bold ideas, unjustified anticipations, and speculative thought are our only means for interpreting nature, our only organon, our only instrument for grasping it, nature that is." It chimes with Francesco Varilla back in 1999, who wrote, "Indeed, no methodological approach to experience is neutral. It inevitably introduces an interpretive framework into its gathering of phenomenal data." A couple more things. Italian researcher, thinker Paolo Garbolino wrote, "We can say that neither the scientific method nor the experimental method exists. What indeed exists is a plurality of scientific practices, but it is precisely this plurality that, at odds with appearance, brings stability and strength to the enterprise of science." He also states that both artists and scientists intervene in the world, and intervention is a process in which an underlying causal reality is used to do, make, or change things. And Varela noted the distinction between what he called first-person events and third-person descriptions of phenomena or events. He described again back in 1999, first-person descriptions presented in isolation. He described them as being presented in isolation as futile, and they ought to be harmonized and constrained by building the appropriate links with third-person studies. And so today, on C-DaRE Invites, we're having a conversation about the body and chronic pain. We avoided the temptation to call it C-DaRE Invites Chronic Pain. All four presenters were involved in the Somatic Practice and Chronic Pain Network, which ran from 2019 to 2021, a network led by C-DaRE's Emma Meehan. I was really struck when I was doing a little bit of work by this a truism, or perhaps it's apocryphal, that anyone can tolerate any kind of pain as long as it's less than 10 seconds. And this words like sensation, perception, awareness, and our very understanding of corporeality get drawn into complex questions when we talk about chronic pain. And so we welcome Anna Macdonald, Aline Haas, Bernie Carter, and Emma Meehan. I'm going to put their biographies, I'll call them abbreviated biographies. It's not their entire lives. I'll just put those in the chat in a minute, so we don't need to interrupt these things once they get started. The structure for today is that each of them will talk for about 10 minutes, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. In the spirit of informality, I'm not going to be timing them. We won't have questions in between. Lily's just going to spotlight the person, and then they'll give their presentation, and then we'll switch to the next. And then after they've finished, I'll host a little bit of a conversation, and depending on how that goes, we'll hopefully, after about an hour, we'll open it out to everyone who's here today. So please keep your mics muted, put questions in the chat at any time. Lily and I will do our best to monitor that. And the order is going to be, Anna's going to be first, then Aline, then Bernie, and then Emma. So Anna, welcome to you all, and I'm looking forward to this.
Hello, everybody. It's so nice to see so many people here. It's just delightful and great to be invited. Thanks to Lily, thanks to Simon for bringing this all together. So I know a lot of you here, but some of you I don't, and maybe you haven't heard of me, but my name is Anna Macdonald, and I'm a dance and moving image scholar, and I specialize in socially engaged practice. So today I want to share with you some ideas from an article that I've just written, which explores the movement of care. And this work is focusing on a screen dance called Reasonable Adjustments, which I made as part of a project working with people who live with chronic pain. And in this article, I think about care both in terms of the way that I work with others, so my method as a socially engaged artist, and in terms of people's self-care in the way that they live with chronic pain. So I focus on what I describe as a quality of responsivity, and I see this operating within the movement of care. And I use the term responsivity here to describe a sensitivity to affective states, a heightened capacity to respond, and the fluctuating exchange between stimulus and action. So here I'm thinking of responsivity as a dimension of somatic attunement, where care takes the form of an improvisation between the artist and the participant, and perhaps between the individual and their pain. So where this work has resonance for thinking about dance and science is perhaps in the role that care might play in generating knowledge. So Reasonable Adjustments, as I say, is a screen dance, and it emerged from a larger project called Circling Again, which was part of a fellowship that I was awarded at Keele University, working with geopoetic scholar Kerry Morgan. And we worked for a year with a small group of people who lived with persistent pain or conditions that caused them persistent pain. And it's a short screen dance where the main task for the performers is to stay in the center of the frame. Now, I'm going to put the link to this work in the chat for you here. I'm not going to show it today because we've got some issues with sound, and it does work better if you see it with the sound. But I'll share an image of it here with you, which gives you a little flavor, hopefully. Can you see that image? Yeah, great. So what happens is the camera is here, and then the camera moves. So the camera keeps shifting. So you've got this very centered shot, but then it keeps moving up and down and to the side. So the performers are continually invited to reposition themselves in relation to the camera shot. And it's sort of playful, and it's sort of unkind, and it's relentless, and we never settle, and they never arrive, and it's never still, and it lasts for about 5 minutes. So it was made as a really direct response. It was made with the participants that I work with. It's made with Sophie Powell and John Mills. And it was in response to the way that they articulated and performed the endless adjustments and tiring dynamic planning that moving with pain requires. So they're improvising both with the camera and with their pain. Their work, their performance enacts adjustments that are often hidden or ignored. And these movements of care, as I describe them, I consider ways of knowing. They offer an embodied knowledge about pain, endurance, labor, and creativity. And these choreographic skills of self-care, according to Amanda Stewart Fisher, who writes a lot, as you know, in the field of care ethics, she considered these both crucial to the successful functioning of a society as a whole and persistently denigrated. So within this work, I see, and within the participatory work that led to this, I see responsivity as a state that combines processes of listening and remaining open to change. But it also involves acting. So it's doing something in response to something happening, in response to another's actions. And this brings with it resonances of responsibility, a term evolved within feminist relational ontologies to articulate the ethical imperative to respond to another, which is conjured with the entangled relationality of care. And that's obviously, I'm referencing people like Tronto and Haraway and Barrett here. So if I do something and then you do something, and then we work out what has to be done next by doing something else, by responding, by being responsive. There is a sense of collaboratively knowing, generating what the situation needs, or at least trying something out as we move towards knowledges connected to this. Holding a sense of collective care as research takes the burden off me as the artist researcher, because as Hamilton writes, normativity, or the right thing to do, can be understood as emergent within our relational experience. So, science. Responsivity asks that you are affected by and receptive to other things. It means that you are present, you're situated, you're touched by your research, knowingly, willingly, or otherwise. And there's a vulnerability in being in touch with other people and things. And I was really struck the other day that an artist and curator who is a student on an MA that I teach, MA Performance and Society, was making a really, what I thought, really fascinating observation, which is really one of these ones that you think, oh, of course, and then the ramifications spin out. She was talking about moving through the world using mobility aids, and she said, I lean on and I touch many things so I don't fall. I'll just repeat that. I lean on and touch many things so I don't fall. And she goes on to wonder whether the vulnerability to COVID, to other things that are going on, are precisely this in touches, just because I touch so many more things as I move through the world. And that's Bethany Stephen Crinks there, the artist and curator, making that really fascinating pragmatic observation about the kind of multiple points of contact, which make me think about the different potentials or desires to move through the world, touched or untouched. Sophie and John are touched by pain. They are affected. They change course and make adjustments. And because they are continually adjusting, this brings attention to the situated nature of their presence in the world. Perhaps they offer what Doane describes as an overly present body, which resists traditional understandings of objectivity because it's too present, it's too in touch, it's too responsive, it's too there to ignore. Just finish off by mentioning an article that I was reading the other day, which was sort of bringing together a lot of work within feminist science and technology studies, which actually I was very heartened to read. And it's by DeLay and Jason and Els Vogel. It's written in 2021. And it's writing about thinking with attachments, appreciating a generative analytic. And in that, they write that much current work in science and technology inflects knowing with care. So these binaries that have been so dominant that really they just sort of explode and say, no, actually, that isn't the reality of the majority of the work going on in science and technology now. And by care, these authors are referring to what they call the affective compulsions that inflect scientific and technological work, which resist traditional notions of objectivity and show that knowing and caring cannot be thought apart from each other. They position these intuitive individual sensitivities not as disruptive, but as something that forms part of a web of sensibilities crafted in social practice, bound to a regime of rules and shared understandings that are, in their words, endemic to and productive of such knowledge generation. So what I loved about that was this sense of removing a fear of touch, removing a fear of being touched, and embracing this situated vulnerability and this implicit relationship of knowledge generation and care. Thanks very much, everybody.
Hi everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here with you, sharing my experiences as a dancer and as researcher. And thank you, Simon, Lily, Emma, Bernie, and Anna to be together with me here. And thank you for all the C-DaRE colleagues for inviting me to be here. It's a great pleasure to be in this great and powerful C-DaRE Invites event. I think it's so important to connect with you. I am in Brazil, and it's just the technology is helping us to be together today. And I can maybe meet these incredible people around the world here, and some of them that I know, and it's good to be here online with you, and hopefully I will be in person soon. That is good too, to be in touch and to connect and touch people. Yeah, but I am here. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm gonna, like, can you see the whole screen? Like, can you see? Okay. I have been working for those who doesn't know me well. I have been working for more than 20 years in the area of dance and dance and health, like as a researcher, and working inside of the university, leading community and research projects with older adults, providing access to health through dance to older adults with and without neurological diseases. And I am here today to share a little bit of my experience in the area of Parkinson's, pain and Parkinson's disease, and talk to you about my experience leading a dance and Parkinson's project at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul here in Brazil. Just to give you a little bit of background for the ones that doesn't know so much about Parkinson's disease, but Parkinson's disease is the second most neurodegenerative disease worldwide, and is characterized by the variable combination of no motor and no motor symptoms. And the figure here, you can see some of the motor symptoms and the other no motor symptoms, and pain is one of the symptoms, and all the combination of these symptoms resulting in negative impacts like less autonomy, less functional mobility, and less quality of life. And the usual treatment that we know, that evidence showed to us, that medicine plus complementary non-pharmacological therapies such as dance or somatic practice could be a good idea for this disease, because it's no cure for the disease. It's like a neurodegenerative disease, and then these people, they have to live, and they have to find a way to live better with Parkinson's. And again, a little bit of background about pain and Parkinson's. Pain is a no motor symptoms and affects ranging from 68 to 95 people with Parkinson's feel pain. And pain is associated with correlating with higher depression and anxiety scores. Like, as we are talking about chronic pain, and we know that pain is not something that sometimes we feel bad and we just lost quality of life. And it's not a lack of consistency in pain treatment with Parkinson's disease. It's not like something that we say, this is better for you, or this is good for you, or what I'm going to do if I feel pain. And it's really, really a big ranging of people that feel this no motor symptoms, because they have, like, as you can see here, they have stiffness, they feel a lot of rigidity in the body, and then this is caused like pain. Every day they feel pain when they woke up, and sometimes during the day. Okay, but I am here to talk a little bit about the work that I've been doing, specific thinking about dance, and this is the project. This is the project that I have been leading since 2016. And we are developing research projects, and also, like, this is a community, it's an outreach project inside of the university, but we are collecting data for research, and then we have been publishing our papers in different languages, in Portuguese, Spanish, and English. But to understand a little bit about the project, I would like to show like a small video for you, like then you can understand how the class is structured. And this is like the participants. Like, can you hear the sound? Okay, thank you. I'm done. Okay. Yeah, this is like the classes are based on Brazilian rhythms, and then I put this sound on the background that is a little bit of Brazilian samba, and in the end, like we have this small mantra that we say that with our minimum we can do our maximum, and this is like something that we have to bring with us. Doesn't make so much sense in English, but it's like makes sense in Portuguese, that like we have to just put all of our energy and keep positive. That is not easy sometimes, but this is our mantra in the end, that they were like saying some words in Portuguese after the end of the class. We always like gathering together and we say these words and a positive message. Let's see what's happening here. Like, okay. Yeah, and because we are talking about pain, we don't have like a specific paper that we publish about the results that we have in the research. We do like mixed method research. We do qualitative research and also quantitative research. But here is a small result that we have these results, like during the pandemic, that we kept the class like online. We just continuing gathering online on Zoom, and these results were analyzed like using the PDQ-8, that is the Quality of Life Self-Reported Questionnaire for people with Parkinson's. And inside of this questionnaire is a specific domain that is the pain domain. And what we saw, that it was like 85% of like the participants that you can see here in the figure self-reported to have pain before the classes. This was in 2022. And like after 6 months practicing dance online, like only 55% reported pain. That, like you see, like we just have much more people reporting that they have no pain after like practicing dance. And recently, this paper is going to be like, it's like recently we received this new the news about the publication of the paper like yesterday. And this is, maybe it's a good paper to read, that is like how Brazilian dance impacts, is like a self-perceived impacts on quality of life of people with Parkinson's disease. And this was a qualitative research with some, and this is what the participants like reporting how they feel after participating in the project, like before the pandemic and during the pandemic. And we have a lot of like, you know, self-perceptions that really, it's really good for them, relating to psychological, physical, emotional aspects, and also including some words about pain. And just for our discussion, I have some questions here. Maybe we can think about it, and how might dance be integrated into overall care plan for people with PD. And I know in the UK, it's really something new, but not so new, that people are discussing to integrate dance inside of the healthcare system, and how this can be focused on addressing pain symptoms in people with Parkinson's. And maybe also investigate the long-term benefits of incorporating dance into treatment plan, like as a complementary non-pharmacological therapy in terms to reduce pain. We don't have so much evidence about this, and also we don't have evidence about somatic practice and Parkinson's disease and reducing pain. And what neurobiological mechanisms are involved in the pain relieving effects of dance for PD? I don't know if it's easy to answer this question, but it's something that sometimes we can't explain how people just reduce pain in a short period, like, and they are feeling pain for many years, and then they start dancing and then reduce pain in 6 months. What happened in their brain? And are there specific types of dance or dance movements that have shown more effectiveness in alleviating pain for PD? In my case, I am investigating the Brazilian dances, and because it's related to our culture, but this could be effective maybe in the UK. If I offer the same the same dance classes, it's going to be fine for British people or other cultures. It's just to think about it, and maybe we can just discuss more other things, but this is my questions, like maybe to answer in the future. And this is our Facebook media, like we have here, like if you are interested in following us, we put a lot of information like videos and things there. Sorry, it's in Portuguese, but maybe you can maybe follow us. Like you can see the videos. It's easy to see the images, and then you can relate to the benefits. And thank you very much. And this is my email, and I am open to the Q&A and happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Bernie Carter. I'm Professor of Children's Nursing at Edge Hill University, and one of the things, well, the thing I'm going to be talking about today is something that's slightly puzzles me and interests me, and something that I've been pursuing pretty much since I met up with Emma and started getting involved with somatic practices, which helped open up my mind to lots of different ways of thinking. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about being this notion of a pain conduit, which I think happens with lots of people who are interpreting or advocating for somebody else with pain. But as a children's nurse and somebody who's been interested in chronic pain in children, and also particularly with children with disabilities, the responsibility and the need for parents, particularly mothers, and I'm not discounting dads because dads are brilliant as well, but particularly mothers who end up becoming their child's advocate in relation to that child's chronic pain. So it hardly seems worthwhile me saying that pain defies language, when what we've been talking about most of today is about the way in which people use their bodies to express pain. And that is so important, such an important component in pain. And we know that communicating pain is almost impossible for most people. I'm reasonably articulate most of the time, but pretty much as soon as I have to start to describe even a very simple headache, you either feel that you're going to be turning your headache into something more dramatic than it is, or actually making it less dramatic than it actually is. So trying to get that sort of tone, to get that sort of sensitivity about how we communicate about not only kind of the intensity of pain, but kind of like what impacts it's having, what we're frightened about, and how that's affecting us is really, really tricky. A lot of my work is done in with children who have got very limited verbal and other means of expression. So these are children who can't sign. These are children who have almost no language at all. They perhaps communicate with a type of intonation of a cry or a moan. So for parents who've got children with that level of disability, the children also have a range of comorbidities, and quite often in the practice setting, where typically a mother has brought their child to perhaps the emergency department because they're worried about that child's pain, the focus of clinicians often comes onto that child's comorbidities. So the fact that they're seizing, they have epilepsy, or the fact that they have some other clinical thing that is seen to be a priority. The usual pain cues that we typically understand as human beings are often masked with children with medical complexity, either because of the way that they hold themselves, they've got perhaps limited facial expression, or they've got very rigid facial expression. And we learn cues from each other, and these children often don't learn these cues. So it's almost like you have a child who's probably holding quite a lot of pain, but without the ability to express it in any way, and without the ability for many people to actually read that child's particular pain. And what tends to happen for both parents and professionals is that there's a form of something a bit like Chinese whispers, where somebody makes a bit of a guess about what's going on with that child's body. Somebody else then kind of starts to build on that guess, which may or may not be right. And then kind of conversations happen. And what typically happens if you're not working with people in a very nuanced way is that it all gets really hard and really tricky, and it's often easy, not necessarily to give up intentionally, but just to not get to the bottom of things. So parents, and particularly mothers as conduits, one of the things that parents do over a period of time of being with their child with complex healthcare needs is that they develop insight and expertise. And we know this because some of the work that I've done and other people have done, qualitative work, we've talked to parents and tried to understand how they can know that their child has pain when there isn't any particular evidence, hard evidence, kind of like scientific evidence for their interpretation, or that or the conclusions that they come to can be challenged by other more plausible reasons for why a child has perhaps got a high temperature, or has perhaps got a very high heart rate, or a low blood pressure, something like that. And when I was thinking about this, when I was invited to do this, I was thinking about the way that I've watched parents actually use their bodies to hold their children or touch their child, or to sort of move across their child's body to try and sense what's going on with that child's body, in the same way that I've learned through some of the somatic practices sessions that I've been to, how simple something that seems to be as simple as touch is such a powerful way of gaining sensitivity and being able to interpret people's feelings and the sort of tension and difference between different parts of people's bodies. So through doing this kind of like physical contact with their child, often very, very light touch because the child won't tolerate very much, parents start to be able to focus down to where in the child's body that pain is, or where they think that child's pain is. And it's a process of kind of elimination, which if a clinician was doing it would be seen to be kind of like differential diagnosis and kind of like high level skills of clinical touch. So parents start to learn to know their child's pain through feeling the child's body. And in this way, the child's internal experience of pain also becomes known to the parent. So they not only know that the child has got a pain in their, I don't know, left hip because their hip is beginning to displace, but they know that that's distressing that child, and they'll know that their child is becoming anxious because of that, and they'll know that other things will start to happen, kind of like and things start to escalate and more things happen. And for children that are in such vulnerable medical situations as these children, the additional component of pain is another threat that's coming to that physical body that can then perhaps trigger more seizures, or drops in blood pressure that can be sort of significantly harmful for the child. So the challenge then comes from a parent who's learnt their child's pain, who knows that their child is in pain, is they then have to start to be able to convince other people, sometimes their partners, and sometimes other people in their family, but most often the most crucial kind of like touch point for this is where they're presenting their child, who they know is in pain, to professionals to try and get validation from those professionals that there is something that needs to be done. And what parents find incredibly difficult is trying to translate the thing that they've felt through their fingers, through their skin, through their sense of their child's body, into language that is sufficiently convincing to actually capture kind of clinicians' attention, to make the clinician start to think about how they will respond to that particular pain situation. Because the clinician, without being uncaring, is very aware that whatever they do in these situations, they're adding perhaps more another medication to a child who's already experiencing quite a lot of polypharmacy, where children respond differently to medication, they respond differently to all sorts of different interventions. So there can be this sort of clinical reluctance to engage because they have to kind of think about the consequences and whether or not the pain can be ignored or whether or not the pain actually needs to be treated. So I think, and I've got no evidence really truly at all from this, although it seems from the previous presentations that there is that sense of other people acting as advocates or people acting as advocates for themselves, that there'll be other people in chronic pain who rely on their carers or their loved ones to actually be that advocate for themselves, because quite often when we're in pain, even if we are able to express our own pain, we often don't have the physical or kind of like the actual sort of resources to actually feel that we can do that, because we have to dig too deep to that. So one of the things that I've done, and the images that I've been using on the slides here, are from an animation that I wrote based on the work I'd done with healthcare professionals and with parents. It's an animation called Communicating Lily's Pain. It's 3 minutes long. I work with James Munro, who's an absolute brilliant animator. And the idea was to make something that was powerful and quite emotive, that could be used as a way of kind of teaching parents at the beginning of their pain journey with their child that they would be being their child's advocate. And also, perhaps even more importantly than that, to actually teach and reach out to healthcare professionals so that they could actually understand what was happening. Because the challenge that I've got is, when I first started nursing back in 1976, we didn't believe babies felt pain, so they just had no pain relief at all. We're well beyond that, but we still kind of have quite a strong, in clinical practice, quite a strong scientific focus. And I think we've got plenty of evidence, we've got plenty of ways of sort of assessing pain these days, but we don't always act on that. So I think what we need to do is change people's hearts and minds rather than necessarily sort of keep pursuing kind of scientific knowledge the whole time. So my questions are these. Are parents and mothers unique in the role that they have? I wonder whether or not there's a curriculum. I'm not 100% convinced that there is, but is there some sort of curriculum that we could develop to support people to learn? And then perhaps most importantly for this group is, what can somatic practices contribute to supporting parents of children with pain who are unable to express it through sort of usual channels? Because I think there's a massive stuff that could be developed. And then there's some, it looks a little bit like the me page, this, but these are just a few references from some of the stuff that I've done, and then other things that that you might want to look at. There you go.
Thanks so much, Bernie. Just while Lily switches over to Emma, I'm just going to say that after Emma has spoken, we'll just have a quick little break just for people to get away from their screens and stretch, or so it'll just be 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll get into the conversation. Thanks, Lily, and thanks, Emma.
Thank you so much. I've just been really enjoying listening, and thanks to Simon and Lily for organising. It was really kind of exciting to be kind of bringing the people from the Somatic Practice and Chronic Pain Network into this frame, this just kind of discussion around dance and science. So instead of like focusing on one research project of mine, it made me think a bit about the question of, what's the value of bringing dance and health research together? So I'm going to try and tackle that a little bit in 10 minutes, just based on some research I've been doing over the last few years. And I don't have any slides or images, but I'm going to start myself so I don't go over 10 minutes. And I have some things I'm going to look at on my screen. So, yeah, I guess what I want to say today is something really simple, which is actually that I feel there's something that bringing dance and health research together can do. That means things like bringing dance and health literature together to help us think about how we might change the way in which we practice dance as well as health research, how it might help us think about how to work with chronic pain through practice, and actually also how some ideas from dance research and dance practice can actually shift the ways in which you might think about health research in chronic pain. So I was going to look at a few examples, and these are going to basically hop around a little bit, so you mightn't get a full sense of the pieces of research they came from, but just to really kind of look at that point I'm trying to make. So the first example I wanted to look at was a paper myself and Bernie actually wrote together. And we were looking at, somatic practices, these body, mind, movement practices that we've been exploring that have touch and that are facilitated rather than demonstrated and are sensory, and what's already been written about them in relation to chronic pain and what might be missing. And then to deduce from this, what might be the principles of somatic practices to support chronic pain in the future. This was the paper was published in 2021, and one of the quotes we had in there was, a majority of studies were led by health and social science researchers, and none discussed co-design with dance or somatic researchers. So the somatic practitioners were brought in to deliver interventions, and occasionally some were named as co-authors on publications. And actually, I do remember one paper where there was a health researcher who was also a somatic practitioner, and then she started to bring in her journals of practice into the approach. So I thought this was quite interesting. I guess it wasn't a huge surprise. And I also have realized that a lot of health research in chronic pain doesn't actually look at what's happening in dance or somatic research. That's not counted. And I also understand that because, for example, if you're doing a systematic review, the kind of dance literature wouldn't necessarily fit the criteria. But I do want to kind of suggest that there is something to be learned in the exchange between these. So I just want to give kind of an example or two from that paper. So let me see. So yeah, one I found super interesting was in the research around chronic pain. We were looking at various aspects. So interoception, like our internal body awareness, exteroception, awareness of the environment around us, and proprioception, awareness of movement in space. So yeah, I'm just going to take this particular example about kind of exteroception and opening up sensory awareness. So in somatic practices, that's often really valued. So the idea is that people can often be shut off from their sensory awareness, and it's about kind of opening up that and bringing attention to it. And actually, when we were looking at the chronic pain research, there were a lot of people with chronic pain who actually, that could be quite overwhelming. So sort of, some sensations like touch or sound or smells can become overwhelming, or the sense of someone's size in space. So I thought actually bringing those two sides of research together, I realized, this knowledge actually would be useful for somatic practitioners working with pain to actually think about these practices more about modulating sensory awareness rather than opening it up. So I felt like bringing those things to that literature together actually could inform future movement practices with people with chronic pain. And there were other examples that were, the other way around, where we were looking at research from dance or practices from dance that might inform pain research. So just one example is a dance artist called Raquel Meseguer. And she was talking about, as a person who has chronic pain, you know, her need to lie down in public space at times and how that can be disturbing for people. And she created this thing called horizontal cinema. So people with chronic pain can actually lie down in the cinema and experience the cinema. So this made me think about, you know, actually kind of an agency with chronic pain, which leads into my next article. But I thought that idea, just a different way of thinking, a creative way of thinking, might be also useful for future chronic pain research, to think about, you know, how does someone get agency with their chronic pain? It's not always the obvious things. It may be something about the environment they're in. How can we change that? So I'm going to skip forward to this other article I published recently. And it's about dancing with chronic pain. So it was based around interviews with dancers who have chronic pain, but they also make choreographic work about it. And in that, I tried to bring together different literature to understand a bit what's the current state of affairs and how it might relate to what they were saying. So I did searches in the area of chronic pain and agency, things like self-efficacy. I did research into dancers with pain, and also I looked into dance and agency, and tried to bring those together alongside the interviews. So why talk about agency? So that topic came up a lot in the network. So a lack of agency is something that can be experienced by people living with chronic pain. They may feel that they can't control a situation. There's flare-ups. Sometimes people don't believe that they're in pain because you can't see it. And also dancers have a high prevalence of pain. And that's for all sorts of reasons related to their occupation, but also kind of like attitudes to pain. And a lot of the research so far has been about acute pain and very little about chronic pain in dancers. So I kind of, in the research, what actually came up where there's various aspects of agency that people experienced, and that's written about already. So one aspect was about individual agency. So the person themselves feeling a sense of being able to take charge, or feel in control. So I'll just go to some of the quotes around that. So Braun et al., they speak about a sense of agency being around experience of initiating and controlling an action. But then there was other research I came across from McCracken and Xiao O'Brien, and they talk about the importance of acceptance of pain and a willingness to encounter challenging experiences without attempting to control them. So then I thought, this is really interesting. Agency is actually about being able to take control of some aspects while also letting go of others. So I wanted to find out, in dance research, how do people explore movement that's about control and letting go of control? So one example was actually in the area of dance and Parkinson's, an article written by Glenna Batson. And she was talking about working with improvisation with Parkinson's. So her idea was working with this kind of ability to act in the world autonomously and independently. So the individual would actually try to gain active ownership over their own movement choices, but they were doing it through improvisation. So rather than learned responses or something very structured. So there was a kind of like gaining control by this playful, developing their own personal movement styles. So it was a kind of a control and letting go of control. And I thought, actually, this might help us in future if we're starting to think about what kind of practices, movement practices might support people living with chronic pain, and bringing together the different kinds of literature, and how people might play with control and letting go. So that was one idea. And I guess I'm sort of coming towards the end now. I'll briefly mention one other aspect of agency, which I think is important. So it's an interpersonal agency. So not just the individual being responsible, but actually how you can gain agency through interrelationships with other people. So I think that's come up a lot in health research recently. Sometimes people felt when you're talking about self-efficacy that you're left on your own with your pain to manage it. And actually now they're trying to talk about more supported self-management. So working with healthcare professionals to gain ownership over your own health. And another topic that's come up a lot in the health literature has been about peer support. So actually peers coming together to support each other, to help manage their own pain, explore their physical abilities and manage depression. So there's been quite a bit of research around that. And when I was looking at what's written about agency and kind of interpersonal relationships in dance, one of the things that came up was about working with dance teachers. So how can a student gain a sense of ownership and control in an environment where they're being taught or there's an authority? And the dancers I interviewed with chronic pain, their experience wasn't always having a sense of agency. It was in fact that they were told, you're not strong enough, you don't fit in the mold. So I think there's a lot still to be explored in terms of dance training and dance performance around how do we create the sense of interpersonal sharing of the responsibility for someone, supporting someone who's living with chronic pain. And the last thing I'm going to mention is about the peer networks. So the dancers I interviewed, many of them were engaging in peer networks, but unlike the pain research, they weren't doing it for health reasons. It was about a sense of recognition, validation, and advocacy. And through these networks, they were kind of building understanding of what worked for them, but also supporting each other and advocating for each other. So I'm going to pause there. But my point that I'm really just trying to bring home is that I think there's a lot that dance and chronic pain research can offer to each other, kind of changing perspectives and also informing future practices. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks so much, Emma, and thanks to all of you, to Anna, Aline, and Bernie as well. Let's take 2 minutes, enough to a little pit stop to get something to drink, go to the toilet, whatever you need to do, and we'll be back here. You don't need to leave the Zoom, obviously, because that would be weird. See you in a couple of minutes. All right, hopefully people start coming back into the Zoom world. Lily, are you happy to spotlight the, are you cold, Professor Delahunter? Sorry to hear that. It's toasty up here in your office.
Jeez.
Does Zoom do this? It does. So what I think, just as people slide back into the Zoom, I think we'll do is maybe just a little less than 10 minutes. I thought I might try and formulate 2, maybe 3 questions that I think are more thematic, which I guess provoked by the things that we've been listening to. And so I think I'll start. I think the way to start is something about language. And this was, very much prompted, Bernie, by what you presented. But there's also something going on about the nature of somatics, let's say, or moving bodies and their relationship to language. So I'm going to just start. I thought that Elaine's scary quote about pain defying language, and then the blurb to that book, which was written quite some time ago, said that pain destroys language, which I found extraordinary. And there's also this sort of trope, I guess, about dance expressing things beyond language or without words. And I guess I was reminded of Wendell Berry, a poet and writer who wrote a book in 2001 called Life as a Miracle. I'm going to quote something from Berry. He wrote, "In speaking of the reductionism of modern science, we should not forget that the primary reductionism is in the assumption that human experience or human meaning can be adequately represented in any human language. This assumption is false." If you don't know Wendell Berry's writing, he has a particular relationship to science. So, and so there's something here. I wonder, there's something about, well, two things. One is this idea of translating something felt into language, and that does the first person, meaning the person who is feeling it, somehow have dibs on this translation being most accurate, and that speaks directly to your work, Bernie. And then also maybe a question more broadly for the group is, do somatic practices train us to articulate what is commonly described as being inexpressible or inaccessible? So there's something there about language and translation, and maybe Bernie, you'd like to start, but also don't want to put pressure on you.
I always feel that I'm in the company of kind of like minds immeasurably greater than mine when I'm amongst dancers and practitioners, because we sometimes, or maybe it's clinicians and dancers and practitioners like that, there's a sense that you kind of almost take for granted that embodiedness of yourself is kind of like a taken for granted part of your practice. And it's something that we talk about in clinical practice, but not everybody, I'm not going to tar everybody with kind of like my brush, but we think about it as being something that is different. It's not kind of a completely natural thing for us. It's something that we sort of add on to the sciencey bit. So we'll add on the embodiment of pain to those tangible things that we've got that we can measure or nail down or use. So language is not perfect, but it's better than nothing. If somebody can describe something in, I don't know, in terms of its intensity, then we know more what to do with it. Because we can respond to an intensity. We're less good at responding to an expressed feeling about pain. And yet we all know from those children who can communicate that the thing that can make the biggest difference to their pain is, one, being believed, and two, having somebody reach out to understand what it is that's frightening them about pain. And even for children who can speak, they don't always have that technical language that sounds sufficiently convincing to be, or sophisticated to be convincing to an adult. So quite often they'll use, as will adults, use metaphors or similes or figurative language. And where we might sort of think it is a marvelous expression in an adult, we'll think it's quite cute in a child. So language can, I think language can easily be destroyed by pain, but we rely on it a lot. But it's also a fairly blunt instrument for describing something that is so all-encompassing, overwhelming, frightening, consequential, that where you see parents will quite often say it must feel like that to them, so they will actually do a movement, or they'll tense up, or they'll do something, and they'll invite clinicians to actually touch the child's body to see whether or not they can feel that and sense that. And the thing that I meant to have mentioned in that presentation is, particularly with mothers, is they will have carried that child for the most part. Most of the parents that we encounter, the mothers will have carried that child within them, so we'll have had that kind of super closeness to that child. And I don't know what that leaves with that mother, and for kind of like picking up for being more sensitive in the future. I don't know. There must be something written that I've not come across. I'm not entirely sure that's an answer. It's probably more of a ramble around a few things.
I just maybe, thank you, Bernie. I mean, one thing I would say is that I'm not sure any of us take bodies for granted, but I won't speak for anyone else. I certainly don't. But maybe any of the others, is there something you'd like to add about language? Maybe it's something about sensation and language, or sensitivity to sensation and language.
We could have a whole seminar on this topic, this is a real interest of mine, because I feel like a lot of somatic practices that I've encountered spend a lot of time trying to articulate experience. And it's made me think a lot about also how what we experience is shaped by language, what language you use, and in different languages, how different things are described. And I just think something that stood out from what you were saying, Bernie, it was about what the parents were saying didn't fit what the clinician's language was. So you nearly need to know that language to go, there's like several translations to go on. So like, I just remember when my dad was ill, that my sister works in health. So she had the language. So we'd be like, this is a problem. And then she'd translate it into the language that could, so I think there's a lot of things going on. It's like not just getting it into language, but actually the right language, the language that's recognized. So yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, I'm just gonna.
I think you're right, Emma.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's. I agree with Emma and Bernie. It's a really an interesting field. Language is something that, for example, I don't speak English, I speak Portuguese, and then to speak to you, I really have to find, a way to communicate with you. Is another language, but I am using the voice, and I think when we try to offer like dance or maybe somatic practice as another is a movement language. Is you don't need to use the voice, and then you use other things, that is maybe you use the hands and you use the eyes, you use the other way to communicate with people. And this way to communicate with people sometimes brings them to another place that they really don't feel about pain. They don't have to express that they have pain. They have pain and they have this sensation, but they're trying to just find another way to communicate. And then when they communicate, suddenly in the brain something happened and they don't feel the pain anymore. But it's another kind of language. It's not like, please tell me, how do you feel? Okay, I feel pain. And but it's not like, it's like being inside of a place that they are maybe similar to other people, that they are not. In the case of Parkinson's disease, I am talking about like how people, they are communicating in the place that I am. I'm not an expert in children and moms and other people, but it's like, and it's a big gap sometimes between the clinicians and the person that don't understand what's like this means, and I have to express myself. But when they are inside of the project, when they are dancing or they are moving, they don't need to express. They don't feel sometimes that they have pain. They don't feel that they have Parkinson's disease. They are like us, like the other people that don't have, I don't know, chronic pain. But I think languages is a very interesting subject, and it's different ways to communicate, and maybe offering dance or movement is another way to communicate that is different to just mention in words. And I remember now, Emma and Bernie, that the webinar that you did about like I think technology and language, and I remember that someone discussed like how it's different to express pain in different cultures. You know, like is a way that you are going to express pain in maybe Oriental culture is totally different than you are going to express pain for in other cultures. This is another point maybe to think about it. That language is a really, really complex, and also pain is really complex, not easy to express. Like if I feel or not pain, depends. Just some reflections, not answers, but points to reflect.
Thank you, Aline. I think what I might do, rather than, I do have lots of things I would like to discuss, but I might just switch to, there's some questions in the chat that I'm going to refer to, and there are two that are overlapping, and I'm going to just start with those. And it's a question about metaphor, and Rebecca Stankliff writes, does imagery help support the articulation of an expression of pain? And then Ajay Casanovas says, I'd like to ask him about the limits of language. Talks about the writer Matt Rader identifies as disabled due to a chronic pain condition. And he says that describing pain is doing the work of the poet because you try to name the ineffable. Do you think metaphors, even images and other expressions, are useful rather than developing a technical medical jargon? So interesting, a sort of a and/or like that rather than that. So this is, speaking directly to what we've just been talking about. And so I'm curious about your sort of sense of imagery. And when I say you, I mean any of you.
I've used with children with migraines and other forms of pain, they've asked children to draw pictures of their pain, and they're almost diagnostic. With migraine, you can pretty much tell whether it's an ordinary headache or it's a migraine type headache the child's presenting with based on the drawing, because they draw different things. We use, within children's practice, we use dolls and drawing and collage and all sorts of different things to give them the opportunity to express things. So you won't necessarily get to the thing that maybe the clinical gold dust that you want, but you've got a much better understanding of what's going on with that child with chronic pain. And with the other thing for those people who feel that they're not artistic, because the use of, I'm not suggesting that photography isn't artistic, but it's a mechanical version of kind of creativity. So quite often people will be given the opportunity to take photographs of things that are meaningful or things that they've lost or things that they think express their pain. And again, for some of those things, they are justifications in and of themselves. And other times they are entries into that world of language where the conversation can be continued. But really skilled practitioners in chronic pain within kind of like clinical practice will let the conversation start with the person rather than going through their checklist of things that are important that, we've been taught, like you do the MOT by going through and making sure the tires are right and you've got enough oil and all that sort of thing. It might not be relevant whether or not your car's got tires or oil or anything. It's whether or not it's the right color for you or whatever. So for that, there's plenty of artistic ways that allow people to express things that are relevant to them, but it takes time and effort and belief from both sides, because you can't just tip up to a chronic pain, appointment and then allow yourself to be necessarily artistic because you've generally gone to a particular clinician because you want an answer, get rid of the pain. So some of these things have to be done really, really gently and carefully. Otherwise, they just think that we're fobbing people off. You know, if I'd wanted to draw a picture, I'd have stayed at home rather than sort of spent 2 hours on a train getting to you. So I think the role of arts and movement practices within kind of like the NHS type practice has to be done with a lot of skill and care. And it takes time, and that's something at the moment that isn't generally available in a typical kind of like healthcare encounter. You have to speak quickly now and know, like Emma was saying, know exactly which buttons to press and what language to use to become an expert receiver of the right sort of resources. I'll be quiet because there's other people that will know a lot more than me that can say things.
Thank you. Does anyone else like to add anything else there? Okay, so I'm going to just Anna Macdonald. I was really curious about this overly present body you described, and in relation to, I guess you might say, hyper responsivity, and it certainly touches on something that Emma mentioned, which is to do with the possibility of being overstimulated or getting too much information, or the type of information through the body being too much. And how do you reconcile, or how do you make sense of that kind of paradox? I'll call it a paradox, not really, but
Yeah, it's really interesting that, you know, this quality is really prized in somatics, isn't it? The kind of attunement, the sensitivity and awareness, a receptivity. And of course, it's also, as you say, absolutely part of a spectrum through to trauma, where you are unable to withstand what's coming in, you know. And I think so that you know, it's interesting when you're encouraging something that's also part of something very complicated for people. And when I was working with that group, we were very interested in agency again. So if we're thinking about responding to pain as an ongoing way of being in the world, how might that be repositioned as choreographic? So something that has intention, something that is rather than a constantly being bombarded and out of control, which they talked about as well, about entering into spaces where they were thinking about their responses to pain as kind of wonder and creativity that they were showing, you know. So there was something about really engaging in that conversation of bringing intentionality into the response, or thinking about the different qualities in the spectrum and where you might shift and flow between the different states. And that's interesting to me in terms of holding, you know, when we're talking about working with people, how like falling into each other, falling into the affect, falling into the to and the fro, and you know, like it's a very romantic idea, isn't it, of the kind of entanglement and affect. I'm very drawn to it. But I also, in those processes, at times really long for a clear sense of position and a beginning and an end, and something that offers stability and clarity. So I think it becomes murky in practice, I think. But you know, detaching or pulling back or not falling in is also a position. It's also relational. It's not that that isn't relational. So perhaps we're just talking about different qualities there. But yeah, I'm very interested in finding ways of articulating that intentionality in the pain response, the creativity in the pain response. And so when you were talking about images, I didn't speak because I thought, well, I don't really do images. They're doing the thing, you know, like in the films, the participants are doing those actions. It's not an image of them moving. They are moving. And in moving, it causes them pain. And they made a choice to do that because they wanted to make the artwork that would create an effective understanding of their experience for others watching it. So, you know, it's an ethical minefield and really interesting, and absolutely about their decisions of wanting to create something that will enable people to feel what it's like to never settle, to have a body that's visibly unsettled, that you can see that it's unsettled. I can choose to remain still and to look as if I know what I'm doing because I'm still. And I can look poised and I can balance. And I have all of these choices, and I can move down a train without touching anything because I can balance. And there's something about that amazing choice that I'm given and that they are not given that was so extraordinary to me in working with them and thinking about what that does. I mean, I work a lot in schools as well within education, and of course, fidgeting, unstill body cannot be tolerated. It cannot be tolerated. It's just, you know, that it's something, a body that won't settle is really difficult. And I think it's something about affectively, it brings our attention to our mortality, to our unreliability, to things that we can't control. And yet the kind of beauty of that improvisation doesn't often, I think, get into the dialogue. Or so there would, yeah. So something for me as a maker, enabling those things to be seen or reframed or appreciated in a different way feels important.
Thank you so much, Anna. In a blazingly bad display of trying to make things happen on time, there's still some really fascinating questions in the chat. I didn't really make it clear to everyone that I was effectively switching from running questions to going to things in the chat. So apologies to everyone there. It was partly because I was just trying to include people as we were going. But yeah, I really recommend, there's a question for you, Bernie, specifically from Scott. There's a question from a kind of point and a question from Kate Marsh, and also Claudia Kappenberg as well as asking a question. But we do need to finish, and so I just want to do two things. One is, or three things in fact. One is to say that the recording of this will be online. It'll be online at this site, the C-DaRE Invites website. It should be here should be up online in the next week or two. The second thing is that the next session is with the dancer and neuroscientist Emily Cross, and that's on the 6th of March at this year, of course, and that's at 11 a.m. in the UK. And as we used to say, be there or be square. And I bet you some of you haven't heard that for a long time, and some of you young ones have probably never heard of it. But just to really to say thank you to you, Anna, to Emma, to Aline, and to Bernie for what I found to be an incredibly rich conversation in its dance across languages and ways of thinking and being in the world. I so appreciate your time and your energy, and thank you all also for everyone for showing up. It's really great to see so many faces or images or initials in the Zoom. So see you all. I hope to see you all in March, and take very good care.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Simon, for sharing.
Thank you all. Thank you.